Agenda. We'll go to item 12 now. Members, and presenting on this is John Dogood, General Manager of Plans and Places, and Ian Smallburn, who is our General Manager in Resource Consents. And John, are you with us now, John? Oh, sorry, John is very much with us. He's right in front of us in the room. John Dogood.
Great, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Mayor, Councillors and IMSB members, potentially online. A very brief report, just seeking delegation to the Chair, the Deputy Chair and a member of the IMSB to approve Council's submission on the Fast Track Consenting Bill. You've received a memo on this previously, as have local board chairs. Our understanding is that the government is looking to introduce this bill this month, and according to press releases from the Minister for the Environment, enact the bill this month. So it's going to be an extremely fast-track submission process, potentially just a matter of a few days, hence the need to seek delegation to a subgroup of the Planning Committee to endorse the Council submission. In a nutshell, the Fast Track Consenting Bill, as we understand it, we haven't seen the bill yet, it's looking to enable certain projects to be approved by the government to go through an independent panel approval process with no ability to appeal that panel's decision to the Environment Court. The fast tracking is primarily achieved by that removal of the Environment Court appeal prospect on some of these projects, and also potentially a reduced ability for parties to participate in the process. So we're anticipating that there will be restrictions on the normal ability of parties to get involved with large-scale resource consents. So it's for resource consents and also notices of requirement for public works, but not private plan change requests, as we understand it. And really just happy to answer any questions you may have at this stage.
Thank you, John. So, members, this is a difficult one because we don't have much information, or we don't have any information other than what was on the Beehive website and the Minister's statements. So we don't have the draft of the bill or anything like that at this stage. So the motion is to delegate authority. I'm just mindful that members would like to probably see what goes forward before it finally goes forward. So I have asked the staff to draft a B, and I think I'd like to put that up. Now, this is going to be very, very tight time frame. So the B reads, and if we can highlight it in red, that the draft submission is distributed for high-level feedback. From my discussions with the staff, the turnaround time is going to be probably at maximum 24 hours. So in some ways, there was a reluctance to put this up because it's almost near impossible to achieve. But the constraint is not put in place by ourselves. The constraint is placed on us. So this will be the best we can do, members. And of course, the chair and the deputy of this committee will, along with the independent Māori statutory board member, and we will be working closely with the Mayor's office as well on the finalisation of that submission. We will do our very best to represent the views that we receive from people here today, coming days, and when we've landed the draft submission and received your feedback. But it would have to be, once you receive your email, it would have to be a response probably within 24 hours, John? That's what it's looking like?
That's what it potentially will be like. If the bill is to be enacted by the end of the month, then that doesn't leave a lot of time for Select Committee to consider submissions, make decisions, so I suspect it'll be a very quick turnaround. Yep.
We'll take questions at this point, or questions and comments, and Councillor Wayne Walker, please.
So I've got a question, I've got some comments. The words that we have here make reference to shovel-ready projects and so on. Given that this council has already put a whole range of projects forward, do any of those projects require this kind of legislation Well, no, we should, because if we've got projects that are shovel-ready and those projects are consented and so on, I wouldn't have thought that they required this form of fast-tracking.
Can I ask the Director of Strategy to respond, please?
Through the chair, yes, the shovel-ready ones are the ones that are consented, and some of which had even started construction prior to COVID. So in general terms, even though we don't know what the bill says, we don't expect those shovel-ready projects to need this. However, the government is very clear that over the next couple of years, in order to create employment and stimulate the economy, there will be more of these projects that will use this kind of process to speed up the consenting so that work can start and employment can happen. Again, we don't know the details. I can't give you any further information than that.
So now I'll speak. So it doesn't appear that any of our shovel-ready projects are affected, and we know that we've got a backlog of projects that are ready that wouldn't require this legislation, because the major impediment to them is actually money, and that goes to huge projects like the City Rail Link, for example. So I've got great reservations around this. The history of governments around fast-tracking is very bad. I refer councillors to the Think Big projects, I think back in the 80s or like, under the Muldoon regime, and I could go through a number of those that frankly were disastrous in terms of the structural change that they made to our economy that ended up in huge debt, and a number of those big projects just fell over. And then more recently, the special housing area projects, amongst which was Iamātao and others, that have proved to be disastrous, and all they ended up doing was lining the pockets of speculators. It's arguable that they didn't meet the criteria that they were put up for. So that is the experience that we have in recent times dealing with fast-tracking on the part of government. So I'm at odds with supporting this government legislation, which we haven't even seen. And frankly, we don't appear to even have a good argument for it, other than some supposition that the government needs it. So again, Mr. Chair, I'm at odds with this. I'm quite happy to put some ideas together in advance of having something, so that at least on my part, you've got a very quick turnaround, because I don't think my position is going to alter.
Thank you. Could you correspond with the General Manager then, please?
Happy
on
to.
those points? Thank you. Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm aware that we have a paucity of information, but I may as well ask my question anyway. So I notice in the report here it's talking about existing Treaty Waitangi settlements. So my first question is, that's part of the process, but on a broader level, where does this bill sit in terms of engagement with Māori and our Treaty Waitangi partnership obligations rather than just settlements?
Through the chair, as we understand, what we've read to date is that the government's giving an assurance that there will be nothing in this that would cut across any treaty settlements that are underway or have been finalised, and also all iwi authorities, so all iwi will have the opportunity to, as we understand it, give comment on any project that's put forward to go through the fast-track process, and also once it's approved to go through the process, they will then be invited to make comment to the expert panel as well. So that's what we're seeing to date is those commitments from the government, but the detail, the devil will be in the detail, and that's something that we'll be certainly looking at when we see the submission, we see the bill.
Thank you. Another question and a comment if we're running them all together. So the second question I have is, could this potentially help out with our Waikato Regional Council water take issues? Because if it's raining this afternoon, which is pretty great, but if it doesn't rain for a long time, we're getting to a point of emergency where it's a public health issue. So this would be the sort of thing that, this might be a tool. That's my question, just around that. And my comment is, I'd like to see the detail before I support it, but I do support the intent of getting our shovel-ready projects up and running as quickly as possible, because frankly, we've got to get our Auckland economy moving forward as quickly as we can. And the top-ranked projects on there are something that have been debated and talked about for decades, some of them. And so I want to get them started. Yeah, so that's kind of my comment, but my question to go back to the water issue, if we can.
Through the chair, I can't actually answer Councillor Henderson's question around the water care take. I just don't know enough detail around that application and whether this might be a process that application could go through. I don't know if Megan can comment on that.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Look,
A different question.
I'll be incredibly unhelpful, Councillor Henderson.
Oh, sorry, you're going to.
And say, look, we genuinely don't know because we don't know what the details are. The purpose, though, of this bill is short term to help with economic recovery. My guessing is the answer is no, but let's have a look.
Thank you, Megan. Councillor Linda Cooper, and just before you ask your question, Councillor Cooper, I did think under the delegated authority there, because this is a report that is authored by both the general managers of planning and resource consents, and you're the chair of regulatory, would you like to have your name on that group of chair, deputy chair, and IMSB member? Would you like to be included there as chair of regulatory, Councillor Cooper?
Thank you for the invitation, because my question was, I can't for the life of me see why this is at planning, because as Mr. Dogood said, it's got nothing to do with plan changes. It's all about consenting. So yes, Anyway, no, I would like to be part of that, given it is a regulatory issue, not a planning issue. And the other thing that I am concerned about, though I want things to go ahead and I want us to have jobs, I know there will be big concern in the community about not having the ability to be consulted with. That is the biggest issue, and it won't fall back on the government, it'll fall back on us. And that is a constant. We are always have to defend ourselves against government regulations and policies, but there's probably not a lot to be done about that, but it does concern me hugely, because as you know, all of us get constant complaints and upset from our community where our current unitary plan allows intensity right next door, and so it's only going to get worse. But yeah, thank you for inviting me. Maybe we can have an offline conversation about why this didn't come to, I can understand why it couldn't come to regulatory, because we haven't been having that, but it should have then gone to governing body instead of planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Angela Dalton, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. And look, I agree with the other councillors, and we're in unprecedented times, but I find this really astounding. And just some comments perhaps for John, just to take away maybe. I don't know why they couldn't use the direct referral option in the RMA and perhaps support the capacity of the Environment Court to respond more efficiently if speed is their concern. It concerns me that we've got new legislation coming in hand over fist, and with such tight deadlines, and this is important. This is about nobody, just about nobody having a say, and I understand the intent, but there's not enough detail to actually make good commentary on it, because the bit around shovel ready, I just don't buy into a new piece of legislation to get shovel ready going, and I wonder where this will go in the end, and why not put more time into getting that urban development bill through, which does similar stuff. So I would just like to say that I really struggle to support this new piece of legislation, when I think that this other tools that perhaps could have been used, and we don't have the context of what those other projects are. That's what I'd like to see. What do they think might be going to happen that a 2-year piece of legislation is going to give effect to get the economy going? Because I think there's a lot of projects that can get the economy going, but then I'm not informed because the bill is not in front of us, nor is the information of what the projects are. So that's where I sit with it, uncomfortable with it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Dalton. And now Councillor Pippa Coombe.
Thank you. I think I've got a question that's more with seeking some clarification. So without kind of a draft submission or knowing exactly what the legislation is going to say, are we proposing that we will be essentially supporting this in principle because it might assist in the COVID recovery, but putting a whole lot of suggestions around what the criteria should be and what the legislation should require? Like, it's not clear from the information we've got, and this is probably a question to John, like, are we saying that we would like to see that no project should progress unless it's consistent with all our plans, including local board plans and the Auckland plan? And at the moment, that's not clear what that criteria would be. And are we saying that we want to have much more robust council input? And what are the words that we would put around that? So I just wondered if we could be given a bit more detail of the approach that we will take to the submission.
John, we're not affirming anything at this stage.
No, that's correct, Mr. Chair. We're leaving that. Unfortunately, it's been left wide open. We don't have the detail yet. Some of the concerns that have been expressed are ones that we would also share, but until we see the detail, we can't really give much of a sense as to whether, as officers, we'll be recommending to support or oppose the submission. It's pretty clear the government's committed to it. I don't really see much change in that, to be honest. But that's not to say that should bind Auckland Council in any way, shape or form in terms of what its submission might be. But I think it's pretty much a given that this bill will go through, and it's more the detail of how some of the concerns that have been expressed here and might be expressed by others are addressed. But yeah, just to go back to it, we're certainly not yet at the point of saying absolutely we would be recommending 100% to run with the submission and support subject to some refinement.
But we must have an approach that we would like to see the government adopt in the best case scenario. So what is that? Like, I mean, this is fast tracking is basically shut everyone out of the process, which is just antithetical to, how we want to operate. What's the right word?
So
But,
through the chair, I guess the report does highlight some of the areas, as did the previous memo, that potentially would be in the council submission. They would be around public participation, robust criteria for something, even getting into the fast track process in the first place, a strong emphasis given to local district and regional plans and a level of consistency with those. So it's
local board
all
plans,
of those things.
yeah, climate action plan.
Well, not mentioned in the report, but and also climate change impacts and mitigation certainly would be a key thing that I think we'd be looking to make sure is embedded in the legislation.
Okay.
So there are some pointers in the report as to what we think the submission should deal with, but that's about as far as we can go at this stage.
Okay, and presumably we could be giving a submission that doesn't necessarily support the fast tracking, but it's saying if this is going to go ahead, this is what we would like to see included in the best case scenario. That gives me a bit more comfort. Thank you.
Long way to go on this yet. Once we see the bill, then we can start working on it. Look, and there might be the opportunity. Is it possible, John, when the bill arrives, has its first reading, we can get it distributed to the members straight away, and then there will be the draft submission that will be distributed as well. So we'll do our very best to get as much information before members as soon as possible. Deputy Mayor, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks, John, for the prelim here. Yeah, sure, we're boxing against shadows here. We're also boxing against shadows in a room with no windows and no lights. But that's absolutely fine. You just flail around endlessly.
So actually, it's not a shadow at all. It's just totally black.
You just flail around. You connect at some point, and that's fine. And we have to connect within 24 hours to get our submission turned around. And I'm all cool with that. Contrary to the other council people are the same, probably including the mayor's got to follow him up. I'm all for this. The RME has been a millstone around this country's neck for a long, long time. And we've survived on negativity and NIMBYism forever. And we're not going to go anywhere until that has changed. So this is a good start. The Minister has said we are acting quickly to get the economy moving again and our people working. Part 2 of the RMA will still apply. Projects are being advanced in time, but environmental safeguards remain. That's the critical point. And if we are going to progress this country, one, get out of this COVID hole, but also get New Zealand, once we're out of the hole, still moving and working, and not having Joe Bloggs, who's anti something that's happening 300 miles away, being able to submit and stop it. or progress the process out for years and hundreds of thousands of dollars later, we're not going to go anywhere. We've been dragged down, slowed down by this thing for way too long. So I'm all for it, Mr. Chair. I can't wait to have my 24-hour turnaround. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor John Watson, please.
I'm assuming that new high-density development in Clevedon will be going ahead then, if that's the case.
Obviously will, but councillor, obviously will.
I agree with pretty much what everyone said, actually. We are flying blind, but you know, there is a need to expedite the process in the circumstances we find ourselves in. A couple of points I would just make, and I understand, you know, how difficult it is for this report to be put together, but a lot really depends also on this expert consenting panel and the, you know, the individuals that make that up. I see once a project is referred to the panel, there's a high level of certainty the resource consent will be granted. Now, you're assuming that they will be the people that will be issuing the appropriate conditions in those circumstances, but that is a lot of onus getting put on, you know, a relatively small number of individuals. And similarly, the assurances that are given in terms of, you know, both our own involvement as a council and the public seem contradictory at best, where, you know, there may be, but there might not be. So there's no certainty there at all. So I guess in those circumstances, and I think the Chair and Mr Dogood have already alluded to it, you know, we will be expressing the appropriate reservations, you know, if and when the detail comes out, because the general tenor of comment in here has been one of being uncomfortable with what's being proposed, but also I would think conceding that there is a need for urgency if we're to recover. So, you know, I'm just assuming, especially if we don't get a chance to submit or to really feed back in the time frame, that appropriate reservation, and if necessary, you know, no view is expressed, and it's put entirely on the shoulders of the government then as the ones who are making the call, who will be responsible for what happens on the ground. So I guess, you know, in the sphere of national politics, there will be accountability in terms of how this actually rolls out in practice, and that might end up being, you know, more of a meaningful judgment than even anything we might say in a submission. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. And Mayor, please, Mayor Goff.
Yeah, I hate to admit that I'm more conservative than the Deputy Mayor. It kind of doesn't feel right. But you know, given my background, I'm kind of nervous about fast-track legislation for fast-track process. And, you know, I'm not going to ask a question because there's no bloody point, because nobody here can answer the question that I'd ask. But the first thing is, this will only go through if the government has the support either of the Greens and New Zealand First or of the opposition. And that means that there's been a whole lot of interplay in Parliament to try to find answers to the sort of questions that we've been asking around here. I don't know yet, you know, whether we will be giving outright support, qualified support, or outright opposition, or we're neutral on it. I suspect what we may be is that we may be neutral or at best cautiously supportive, subject to a number of safeguards and qualifications. But what is absolutely certain is that we need to make a submission on it for the reasons that John Watson has said. You know, if we don't have a say on it, then it goes through without any influence from us. So we need to put something forward. It will be done under really difficult conditions, because at best there'll be 3 days for submissions. I really hate that process, I've got to say. But look, it is an extraordinary situation. Look, there are examples where all of us can say the Resource Management Act is a pain in the bloody neck and it's a block for what we want to do. And the clear example was actually the one Shane Henderson raised, which was, you know, 7 years to reach 89th in line for a vital water supply project. There is something wrong here, and I wouldn't rule out that, you know, this is sunset legislation, 2 years only. I wouldn't rule out you might be able to use that legislation to do something quick if we get to the situation, as we may well do, that we need to act urgently on it. At the same time, I kind of like to have safeguards and community input to decision making. I think that's what democracy is about. And it's finding the balance between those things. I think there are some good safeguards there. It's got a sunset clause. It's 2 years. It will be chaired by a Environment Court judge or a retired judge. So you've got that judicial independence, knowledge, expertise there. We will nominate, if it's an Auckland project, we will nominate somebody to be on that panel. Iwi will have a say on that panel. We will try to get the expertise on the panel. And you know, when this first came out, I sat down with Stephen Town and said, geez, I'm not sure about this, Stephen. What do you think? And his view was actually quite positive. He said, I can think of 100 projects where this would be really, really useful to council getting something done in a timely way. And I'm thinking of the next year when unemployment suddenly hits up to 9 or 10%, when we will want to move really quickly to save and create jobs, to get economic recovery. So it is a gamble. It's a gamble that the legislation will be used in the appropriate way to help people and not be a bulldozer riding roughshod over people's rights. But hey, I can't say yet until I've seen the detail, and even if I've seen the detail, I don't know what projects they'll call in on it. But absolutely, we need to make a submission, and I think I'd like to obviously make a submission along the lines that I've suggested. Look, there's some good things that could happen here, but there are some big risks. What we want is assurance around the risks, and what we want is, you know, other mechanisms that would help ensure that in the short life that this bill will have, it'll be used for good purposes. Just to Linda Cooper's point, actually, I think it will, if they do misuse it for less than justifiable reasons, it will fall back on the government. So I'm kind of not worried in this instance that this will reflect on us. It is clearly a government and an emergency measure, but it will need safeguards if it's to do the right thing. And I hate the process, but that's the process we're faced with, and I think we need to make that submission. Love to have Linda Cooper's input into that and the Mayor's office input into that as well, Mr Chair, and we'll try with our officers, John, to do the best job we can in the very short time available.
Thank you, Mayor Goff. And Councillor Richard Hills, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm really nervous about, this supporting what Councillor Dalton and others have said. It says in the information that we have, environmental controls will stay in place, whatever for the safeguards, whatever safeguards that can be judged. I'm not sure. It mentions it won't affect treaty settlements, but that is not that's not accurate in the way we consult with Māori and Mātāa Waka. So it's not just about treaty settlements. So I have concern around not having proper consultation in partnership with Māori, whether it's iwi or Mātāa Waka in our communities. So I have real concerns about that. I do have concerns, like Councillor Walker says, Ihu Mātāa was a fast track government process that the council felt forced into with the SHAs, and we're still living with those consequences from a long time ago, and they never got most of those SHAs never got off the ground anyway, so it never got the outcome, the fast track outcome that was maybe wanted at the time. But on the other hand, I also wonder if we overblow it in some areas. So in say the state housing areas now in our area, in our ward, Chris, the community isn't consulted on those because they are permitted activities. They're large, but they fit within the terrace housing and apartments, or they fit within the mixed housing urban. So people aren't consulted like maybe they thought they'd be consulted because they're permitted activity. And most of our consents do not go out past a few neighbours maybe, or most are not put out to anyone at all. So we could be overblowing the speed at which our current. So is this really needed? On the other hand, I think of the Northern Corridor project. You, me, Councillor Walker, Councillor Watson, and others, submitted quite extensively on the Northern Corridor project, and then that got underway through the Environment Court process pretty quickly, and then they've got that motorway works and bus station works started pretty soon after that, and they are very well underway in what feels like quite a short time. So I wouldn't have said that the RMA process affected jobs in any considerable way. So I do wonder, if this is a little more about, those who scream for cut the red tape, but also sometimes the people who want to have their say the most. So it's balancing that. But I do have serious concerns around the climate impacts, the environmental impacts, and a proper say for Māori, especially considering the constant issues we make when we make these decisions in isolation and focus only on the economical job impacts, which are really, really needed. And I understand why this is being pushed forward, because we need those jobs desperately to get out of this. But I wonder how much effect really this change will do and could create a lot of angst. I would say that we have quite a number of projects that could be underway that are consented, that are dragging, that we'd love the government to throw a whole lot of money and get those happening now. I reluctantly support this because it's for jobs and incomes and all that, but I hope that our final submission is pretty strong on climate, environment and Māori outcomes and feedback, because we cannot continue to make the mistakes that Auckland and other cities continue to make, is when we drive everything backwards after many years of trying to make the right decisions for those 3 quarters, especially going forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hills, and I'll now go to Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Kia ora, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the opportunity. So I'd like to thank the staff for your fabulous report. I am in full support of the Deputy Mayor's comments, and I have listened to everyone here too with regards to your views and opinions, and I agree in principle with those, but I have faith in people in this emergency situation, and I have faith in the panel. I also have faith in the people that will chair those panels, and I have faith that we will share our view and opinion, and that those views and opinions will align to a better Auckland and Aotearoa. So I am in full agreement, and I support that on point 4 we see the Minister for the Environment will determine the project, so I think that says it all for me. I just would like to say that I do think we need to get the economy going. We do need to work together. So what I'm going to finally share with you is this. 2 things. One is what government used in their campaign to win, and the second is what we're doing to win the opinion of Aucklanders in our Tamaki Makaurau and our emergency budget. So let's do it together. Kia ora tātou.
Nice, thank you, Councillor Mulholland. And Councillor Desley Simpson, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Look, what a nightmare. I'm still reeling over the fact that the Mayor thinks he's more conservative than the Deputy Mayor. But look, in all seriousness, I just would ask you to look at Resolution B and read it from someone who's not in this meeting. And I just wondered if it could be rewritten slightly, so request, instead of request that if the submission time frame allows, we know it's going to be tight, say request staff will forward the draft submission to the Planning Committee and local board chairs for high level feedback, noting that the submission time frame may be extremely tight. Do you see what I'm saying? It just looks as if, look, if it's going to be, we're not going to forward to anybody if it's going to be too tight. I think we should always try and do that first. That was just my point around.
I'm just trying to work out what the difference is, but look, I'm happy to.
It just, if you read it cold, it just says if the submission time frame allows, we'll send it to other people, right? We know it's not going to be a long time frame. We know it's going to be tight. So let's say we request staff will forward it to the Planning Committee and local board chairs for high-level feedback, noting that the submission timeframe will probably be extremely tight.
Okay, look, it's neither here nor there, so we'll have a look at those words. Thank you, Councillor Simpson. Are there any other comments? Welcome back, Councillor Bartley, who's just been delivering a submission to a select committee. Justice Reform Select Committee on our electoral submission. Thank you. So look, just before we go to the vote, members, it is difficult to speak to this, but I would hope that the bullet points under paragraph 14, are they generally supported? So John Dogood and Ian Smallburn raised some key points there. I'm not hearing any feedback on those points. No, Councillor Mulholland did address one of those points, but from what I've heard, I think there is general support. While you're pondering that, I'll go to Councillor Alf Filipina. And if somebody could silence their dance music.
That's probably it.
Councillor Filipina, please.
Thank you, and my apologies for the dance music. It's just something I wanted to do some exercise, so my apologies for that. Chair, look, my question is, so this particular process is a government process that we're feeding into. Can I just confirm that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay then. No, that's all it was. I just wanted to be clear in my mind that it's a government process that we're feeding into. Thank you.
Not dissimilar to the process
that
Councillor Josephine Bartley has just represented us on, and many of us have done the same task. It is government asking us our views, though, and we will offer those views. Okay, members. Well, look, I think we've canvassed this well. John, I think you can take away that there is general support for the bullet points that you've highlighted under paragraph 14. I've probably got when the bill does come up, I've probably got a question about what the sunset. Why 2 years? Why not 1 year? I'm not suggesting I'm supporting the bill. I'm just posing a question. There needs to be some evidence as to why a sunset clause should be 2 years as opposed to 1 year. There's nothing quite like, something that's temporary when the writer of the legislation really has their eyes on maybe something that's more permanent. So, and look, it's not just about the notification under Section 95. That leads to extinguishing the rights of appeal to the Environment Court, but I understand the right is retained to go to the High Court, which is a very costly judicial review. So it does extinguish the right of participation, and that, as Chair, I have to express that concern as well, that a number of members have articulated that concern. So let's see what the bill itself says, but I think we might have to go back and pick up on that complete lack of public participation. Okay, put it to the vote. Deputy Mayor, given your enthusiasm and your conservatism, I'll put you there as a seconder. So it's moved and seconded. I'll take it on the voices. All those in favour say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. And would anybody like to have that no recorded? No, I just need to. Okay, I'll record your no. Thank you. So, members, that is carried. There is nothing further. Just move. Somebody like to move procedurally? Mayor and Deputy Mayor on item 13. I'll put that to the vote in voices. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. I'll just check with our staff. Thank you, Duncan, our governance advisor. There's no further business. And thank you, members. In the post-COVID world, our first planning committee is complete.
Thank you.
Oh, and there is no lunch, but the deputy chair of the committee was up all night last night making us a cake.
Shane, are you listening? Shane, are you listening?
Yeah, I am, yeah.